the Christians having been massacred, partly in the plain and partly in the basilica itself. All the historians of Toledo, inclusive of the venerable Archbishop Don Rodrigo Jimenez de Rada, in his Latin and Spanish chronicles, agree in this statement of facts. In view of these facts, writes Amador de los Rios, there can be no doubt that there existed between these two peoples, the Arab and the Jewish, a certain kind of combination and concerted action, which seems to proceed from secret sympathies and understandings, if not from former pacts and alliances. We allow ourselves, relying on what the old chroniclers tell, having gone more deeply into the study of this historical question, to affirm that the Jews, and they only, attracted the Arab hosts to Spain." End quote. And in fact, Harold Livermore, in The Twilight of the Goths, seems to indicate that Muhammad himself was essentially seen as Jewish by many in the West at the time, with theologians not knowing what to make of Islam in these earliest stages. Finally, the Jewish Encyclopedia also states, quote, "It remains a fact that the Jews, either directly or through their co-religionists in Africa, encouraged the Mohammedans to conquer Spain, and that they greeted them as their deliverers. After the Battle of Jerez, in which African Jews fought bravely under Kala al-Yahidi, and in which the last Gothic king, Rodrigo, and his nobles were slain, the conquerors Musa and Tariq were everywhere victorious. The conquered cities Cordova, Malaga, Granada, Seville, and Toledo were placed in the charge of the Jewish inhabitants, who had been armed by the Arabs." End quote. Although modern historians are currently working overtime to portray this period as a rebirth, and the so-called Andalusian Empire as a bastion of tolerance and learning and enlightenment, those who lived through the period, especially the transition, seem to tell a polar opposite story. A great example of this being the compelling work by Dario Fernandez Morora called The Myth of Andalusian Paradise. The stories of this carnage and atrocity are almost unbelievable, and the majority of such tales have certainly been lost forever. Dario Fernandez tells us, quote, "Shortly after the Islamic forces landed, the flesh of some of the Christians killed in battle was boiled in large cauldrons under the sight of terrified Christian prisoners, who became convinced that the Muslims were cannibals. And then, quote, in a furious assault, the remaining Christian defenders retreated to a church to continue fighting. According to al-Makari, the Muslims put the building to the torch, and the Christians inside died without surrendering, and those that did surrender were beheaded." End quote. For Roman, Greek, and Goth, the holy places were sites of refuge, respected even in times of brutal war. Such actions would have been jarring. Having recently burned the Library of Alexandria in 642, and even made an attempt to destroy the pyramids, the Muslim armies that rampaged through Europe seemed especially eager to destroy churches, loot all valuable treasures, and kidnap massive numbers of females for sexual slavery, renaming towns and monuments and roads as they went. They promptly destroyed a Gothic bridge, one of the finest in all of Europe, and tore down a gigantic bronze statue in Cadiz, thinking it was made of gold. And it was in this same period that the famed Colossus was procured by a Jewish Syrian trader and promptly melted down for scrap metal. The historical work, The Chronicle of 754, speaks powerfully of the fall of Spain. Quote, "Who can relate such perils? Who can enumerate such grievous disasters? Even if every limb were transformed into a tongue, it would be beyond human capability to express the ruin of Spain and its many and great evils." End quote. The fleeing Visigothic nobles, unable to travel quickly with their immense treasures of accrued generational wealth, lost virtually everything, and had to hastily bury much of the rest. Quote, "We have magnificent Visigothic religious treasures found buried along the routes leading from southern Spain to the north," Dario Fernandez's book tells us. And Arabs were to come across stashes of emeralds and rubies, quote, "in such abundance as no man had seen before."